Peace, my peaceful people. What's good? It's your brother, man. Say I knew. You see, I got my old man's on already. You know what I'm talking about? Like, yeah, let's get it. Got a long one ahead of us, right? We're going to be here reading for a couple of days, it seemed like. But no, got to get it all in. So, without further ado, all right, let's get it popping. All right, we are at hexagram 18. Very, very interesting hexagram. And as you see, well, as I have warned you, Chuck got a lot to say about this hexagram. Excuse me for the herbs in my mouth. You know what I'm saying? That's how us, you know what I mean? True juju men, we do it. That's how we do it. You gotta put them herbs in your mouth. You know what I mean? All right, here we go. Hopefully it don't mess with my reading too much. 18th hexagram and additional insights in questioning the oracle. Okay, here we go. Most of you fail to realize that your ill health does not only express itself as pains, physical discomforts, etc. It also affects the way you function emotionally and mentally. It affects your clarity of perception, your clarity of understanding, and your ability to cope. And these things affect how you perform from day to day. And how you perform from day to day adds up to your destiny. If you come here to work, then let's work. At some point, you have to understand that we are here not to socialize, not to accumulate information, but to socialize in a harmonious way to accumulate information that you are going to put to use. This is a very interesting experience where so many of you at one time are receiving the kind of information that otherwise could only be given to professionals, such as homeopathy. You know about these herbs. This kind of information is made available to you. We go to the process of explaining to facilitate it so that you can get your health together. And then you still continue with the Western habit of not making your health top priority. You can tell me about how much you meditate and how much you don't meditate, but I don't need to ask. I just simply look at how you function, how you work. I look at your priorities. And that tells me how much you are meditating and how well you are meditating. A sign of development of spiritual growth is placing your health on a very high priority, a top priority, especially when it has been made possible for you to tackle that subject very easily and effectively. I kind of edited that. Most of the people who have turned in their assignments and received their consultations and already started the therapy have reported back on their follow-up consultations that there has been some marked improvement in their health. There is no reason for you to not diligently complete your health report. In other words, I know you are not to be discouraged by others telling you that there has been no help. That cannot be the truth unless people are calling me up to follow. Okay, so he's getting into certain things that he's doing with, like, you know, people who are taking the classes and the health classes and things like that within the society. Okay, so that's all good. We can skip some of that because we got to. All right. Okay, let's see if we can get it in right here. Many of you have all kinds of emotional problems, stubbornness, your lack of perception, your lack of receptivity, your failures to change what you ought to change. All of that, to some degree, is determined by your ill health. Complete your health reports and turn it in. You got the forms. It was very easy to take a highlighter and mark down the symptoms, which are not hard to identify. Okay, so he's still in that, right? Still in that. Okay. On that note, we will deal with the hexagram 18. Work on what has been spoiled. Decay. Let me start off by saying that a Japanese book of changes says about this hexagram that there is a cancer that must be extracted. It starts off this hexagram by saying that there is a cancer that must be removed. With that insight, you can get a good picture of the 18th hexagram. Truth. Synchronicities, boy, I tell you what, it's a magic life, man. The Chinese character Ku represents a bowl in whose contents worms are breeding. This hexagram is symbolic of decay, putrefaction, infection, something that is not only corrupt, but if nothing is done about it, it will continue to decay and spread to other things. We are not talking about something that is bad in a stagnating situation, but something that is bad and will progress in being bad. That's interesting. This means decay. Okay, we to the text, right? This means decay. It has come about because the gentle indifference of the lower trigram has come together with the rigid inertia of the upper, and the result is stagnation. Since this implies guilt, the conditions embody a demand for removal of the cause. A hole is punched right there. The meaning of the hexagram is not simply who has been maybe spoiled, I think, but work on what has been spoiled. Okay, so let me run it back. I know what it says. It says, the meaning of this hexagram is not simply what has been spoiled, but work on what has been spoiled. All right, so it's a hexagram about work because the decay has the potential to increase if it's not worked upon. Back to Shekel. Let me go back again. It says the decay has come about because of a gentle indifference of the lower trigram. This gentle indifference of the lower trigram perhaps is not a correct way of putting it, but because of neglect, because of indifference, such as in a society, people are indifferent about or give low priority to philosophy of life, to learning about health, to learning about different things of life, etc., this leads to stagnation. And it says, since this implies guilt, or shall we say implies fault, something done incorrectly, the conditions embody a demand for the removal of the cause. How will this demand be carried out? How will this demand be carried about depends on the lines itself. Okay, now we're at the judgment. To the text. Work on what has been spoiled. So he's edited because usually it says what has been spoiled. So he's put that in there. Work on what has been spoiled has supreme success. I think that's the case anyway. It furthers one to cross the great water. Before the starting point, 3 days. After the starting point, 3 days. What has been spoiled through man's fault can be made good again through man's work. It is not immutable fate, as in the time of standstill, that has caused the state of corruption, but rather the abuse of human freedom. Yeah, things stagnate when people have too much freedom sometimes because they stop paying attention to what's essential, what's, most true. They stop paying attention to the things that, like it's like when things aren't, when you're not quite free from, this or that, when you don't, you can't just have the money to just buy anything and do anything. It's like, you kind of don't grow in a way, unless you're really concentrating on it, you just won't grow because there's no challenge to push you. There's no, reason to, get up and do your ritual, right? Things are peaceful. You got some money, everybody's good. And you can neglect your ritual now. And now things have the chance to go ahead and take a downturn because you're not concentrating on it. You're not focusing on it. You're just letting it be. Right? This is very important. You may want to go back to the 12th hexagram in your book and make a note that the stagnation of the 12th hexagram is due to fate, meaning is due to the laws of cycles working in a situation. There is a time when heaven and earth come together. There is a time when heaven and earth depart from each other. But in the 18th hexagram, what we have is a situation in which the stagnation has come about because of human fault, human negligence, human error, human indifference. Getting back to the 12th hexagram is just simply speaking about the lack of external productivity. It speaks about someone leading someone else into a path of renunciation temporarily. They will be renouncing external manifestation. That is the question of cycles. If you fall low, if you go into poverty of the 12th hexagram, it is because you failed to prepare to save something when you were up. How low you fall under the 12th hexagram depends on how you dealt with it when you were in this up cycle. But things that are stagnating as an aspect of the cycles themselves. In the 18th hexagram, however, the whole decay, everything is due to a person's error, neglect, etc. Work towards improving conditions promises well, because it accords with this is the text, see, I'm forgetting again. Work towards improving conditions promises well, because it accords with the possibilities of the time. Back to Shekel. When you get the 18th hexagram, the oracle is telling you that the emphasis is to work. The oracle is telling you to work on what has been spoiled, because even though there is a decadence, the entire situation shows that the ability and the means and resources of improving the situation are always there. If you get the 18th hexagram and fail, it is further your fault. It is a double fault, because it is one of those situations where it is really within your being to correct the situation. You know, like the tarot folks would say, I guess a good way, like if you're using tarot language or that language that they speak in the kind of new age circles, whatever, they would say this will be the karmic hexagram. This is the hexagram of the karmic, right? Where there's corruption involved. There's, the individual's own, urge to kind of be bad on some level, right? Things decay because of, some level of karmic functioning. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. All right. So back to the text. We must not recoil from the work and danger, symbolizing the crossing of the great water, meaning do it no matter how great the work is. That's what Shechem said. Back to the text. But must take hold energetically. Okay, let's run it back because he interrupted a sentence that he was saying. So let's go back to the beginning of the sentence. We must not recoil from work and danger, symbolizing the crossing of the great water, but must take hold energetically. Success depends, however, on proper deliberation. This is expressed in the lines before the starting point 3 days. After the starting point 3 days. We must first know the causes of corruption before we can do away with them. Hence, it is necessary to be cautious during the time before we start. Then we must see it too, that the new way is safely entered upon, so that a relapse may be avoided. Therefore, we must pay attention to the time after the start. Back to Shekel. That is very clear. 3 days before, 3 days after doesn't necessarily mean that when you get this hexagram, you are going to be prepared in 3 days. That is a symbolic of needing to truly prepare yourself before you undertake the work of changing yourself. Because before you can successfully work at changing certain things, you might need 10 years, 20 years, a whole lifetime to change the conditions of the 18th hexagram. It could be something that you could do in 10 minutes. It is a question of proper deliberation. 3 days is symbolic of a preparatory cycle that you must go through, a cycle of preparation. Then after you have done the work, then you must continue for some time after you succeeded, quote unquote. You must continue to monitor the situation to make sure that there are no relapses taking place. Back to the text. Decisiveness and energy must take the place of inertia and indifference that have led to decay. in order that the ending may be followed by a new beginning. Let me run that back. Decisiveness and energy must take the place of inertia and indifference that have led to the decay in order that the ending may be followed by a new beginning. The image. The wind blows low on the mountain, the image of decay. Thus the superior man stirs up the people and strengthens their spirit. When the wind blows low on the mountain, it is thrown back and spoils the vegetation. This contains a challenge to improvement. It is the same with debasing attitudes and fashions. They corrupt human society. Do away with this corruption. The superior man must regenerate society. Let me run that back. When the wind blows low on the mountain, it is a throwback and spoils the vegetation. Okay, get that picture. This contains a challenge to improvement. The wind spoiling the vegetation on the blowback, right? It is the same with debasing attitudes and fashions. They corrupt human society. Do away with this corruption. The superior man must regenerate society. Tshaka. What is being said in this hexagram is in an implicit way, is that almost always when you get the 18th hexagram, you must go to the superior man because you are locked into your conditioning. There is a decay that you cannot see beyond your conditioning. So you must go to a superior light to see the way out of it, right? Like we can't see ourselves, right? Back to that one. My own personal metaphor for this hexagram is that of a broken record. Okay. If an external force does not come to lift the hand, it will stay there. It will not move out. I used to use that metaphor until somebody came and invented a turntable that diagnoses itself and moves along. So I can't use that metaphor anymore. That is the problem with contemporary symbols. It sends you back to the bowl with worms, with the worms as worms in it. You try to improve on those symbols and you use contemporary symbols and somebody comes along and reprograms that material for you. Sort of like changing the languages from the original scriptures. You know, they kind of, sometimes they lose their, that juice, that, the true Hebrew words. Like when they say, made in the likeness, made in the image of God. No, it's not the image. It really is the likeness. If you go back to the Hebrew words of 126 Genesis says, I don't know what it is off top, but that word means likeness, like meaning similar, right? Something that is like something else. And, in English language, like is a word that means what it means, but I think that, again, you have powers that don't want you to necessarily be focused on that verse. And I think that's the most important verse in that whole book, because it tells you who you are. It shows you exactly who you are walking this planet. Man was made in the likeness of God is the original word. But when you say, man was made in the image of God after our likeness or something like that, see how much got lost right there? Or we just look like the same as God looks. Like God got 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. That's us, so we leave it right there. But they don't want you to focus on the fact that man was made in the likeness of God. Because if you do that, then they can't necessarily be the leader of you like they want to. You know what I'm saying? They could if they were just righteous individuals teaching righteous stuff and being righteous. But, they don't want to do that. All right, let me not get off. Back to the text. His mother's likewise must be derived from 2 hexagrams. Not sure what that is, because it says his mother's, but that's not the word they mean. I'm not sure. likewise must be derived from the two trigrams, but in such a way that their effects unfold in orderly sequence. The superior man must first remove stagnation by stirring up the public opinion as the wind stirs everything, and must then strengthen and tranquilize the character of the people as the mountain gives tranquility and nourishment to all that grows in its vicinity. Teshekkum. This warns us against taking too literally how the commentators of the I Ching explain the symbolism of the Yi. Originally, it says that the image of decay is the wind blowing indifferently, the gentle indifference. The gentle is the wind, the trigram sun. Sun is on the bottom. Then later you find that it is used to symbolize the teachings of the superior man that stirs up the masses. But the wind, the hexagram sun, is used as the image of that low wind that blows low on the mountain, that comes back and spoils the vegetation. There is a lack of consistency in use of the imagery here. So he's talking about the text and how the text is not consistent. Back to Shekel. But for you to understand the symbolism of the I Ching, the correct meaning of the trigram sun here as the image of the teachings of the superior man, because it answers how does one work on what has been spoiled. One works at what has been spoiled through the gentle, meaning through repeated suggestions, through teachings, through affirmations, through daily meditations. That was me. But if it is a matter of negative conditioning within a person or society, then it is through new teachings, new ideas that we are given through suggestion and not by force. One does not, I'm thinking about the thoughts that I be having. You know what, boy, I tell you what, man, sometimes I be reading and the thoughts that I'm having, they'll be about nothing about what I'm reading, and that's where I be messing up. I'm saying, but I'm laughing at my thoughts. Oh my goodness, boy, Sebek. Yeah, we still in Sebek Mercury retrograde. Funny. All right, let me shut up. But if it is a matter of negative conditioning within a person or society, then it is through new teachings, new ideas that we are given through suggestion and not through force. One does not change the conditioning in the 18th hexagram through force, but through the gentle, by teaching. That is what the lower trigram sun is doing in that hexagram. If it is a question of illness, then one removes the illness through methods that are gentle as opposed to radical, violent measures, right? So nothing gets changed through bringing down the hammer at the 18. You know, this is coaxing and, teaching. Not so much coaxing, but, convincing and teaching and repeated talks and repeated affirmations and repeatedly throwing the energy at it to correct it, whatever it is, right? Here back to, okay, here we go. So 6 at the beginning, reading the lines now. Setting right what has been spoiled by the father. If there is a son, no blame rests upon the departed father. Danter? I don't know what that's saying. In the end, good fortune. What is that word? I don't know what that is. Okay, back to Shekel. Here we find a little bit of tradition that comes out of China in a way that it also would apply to traditional Africa and would be meaningful in a Western setting. Such as, if there is a son, no rest upon the departed father. No blame rests upon the departed father. Meaning, in China, as in Africa, if the son was of a certain age and the father died, then the son becomes the head of the household, until or unless the mother is remarried. If there is a son, no blame rests upon the departed father. It's just simply saying, setting right what has been spoiled by the head of the household. That is another way to rephrase that line. Whoever was or is at the head of the household, for you Westerners, that is the way it would be. Meaning, if your father was dead, then the oldest son could not have been blamed. In this line, when the father dies, the older son takes over the responsibility. In the Western setting, that cannot be the way because there is no such tradition in Western society. Here is a question of the head of the household, whether it be the father, the mother, or whoever sits in the society. It doesn't matter who is at the head of the household. People here still argue about who's going to wear the pants instead of letting the truth be the guidance of the family. Back to the text. Rigid adherence to tradition has resulted in decay. Back to Shekman. That is very important. Traditions, for the most part, are adaptations of ageless truths to specific needs at specific times. When people in a particular society are at a particular level of consciousness, then certain vehicles are instituted and they become traditional. But if society goes beyond that, grows above that, or slips beneath that, then the tradition has to be changed. It is a very common thing that where traditions are out of sync, especially in Western society, with the actual demands of the times, even in Africa today, the tradition is not keeping up with the demands of the times. That is why young people more and more are leaving the tradition to embrace Western tradition, because the people have failed to alter the tradition without doing violence to the underlying truth to make that tradition interface effectively with the demands of the Western world. Because this can be done. Because this can be done. Kind of said it. Like, yeah, because this can be done. Like, we can do this. Like, you can actually do that. But, all right, back to the text. But the decay has not penetrated deeply. So can still be easily remedied. It is as if the son were compensating for the decay of the father, or the decay his father allowed to creep in. Then no blame attaches to the father. However, one must not overlook the danger or take the matter too lightly. Only if one is conscious of the danger connected with every reform will everything go well in the end. Still talking about Shedem. Still talking. The decay came by the traditions that our fathers or our predecessors, it could be the supervisor or the previous head of a department, if it is about a job or a school situation, where decay has set in because of whatever went wrong. Right? He kind of cut himself off. Let's see. Run it again. The decay came by the traditions that our fathers or our predecessors, where the decay has set in because of whatever went wrong. Okay. But the situation is But the situation is such that it can be easily remedied by the next head of household, or even by oneself. But it says, only if one is conscious of the danger connected to every reform. Let me say something about the word danger as it is used in the I Ching. Most times, 99.9% of the time, the word danger is a mistranslation for the Chinese word for difficulties. This is very important because oftentimes people have run saying this is a dangerous situation, when the text should have really said a difficult situation or an intricate situation. If one is aware of the intricacies. That's pretty deep because, you say danger and it's like, whoa, now you tense up as you're reading because you think about your situation and how this is going to go dangerous in some way. Like, that's a strong word. But if you say intricacies, then it kind of like, if you inquisitive, if you, studious kind of person, you say, all right, well, let me, get keen about this thing and, see what can be fixed. Yeah, interesting. If one is aware of the difficulties, and wherever there are intricacies and difficulties and sophistication implicit in the danger that one may fail. And wherever there are intricacies and difficulties and sophistication, implicit is the danger that one may fail. That is easy to take, but it's easy to take the word danger in the sense that I am in danger from the outside, as opposed to I am in danger of not solving this situation properly, of not understanding, and hence failing. If you use the word danger here, you could err very easily to think that the danger is the conditioning itself. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I haven't been a half hour in and didn't push record. If you, back boy, something about my concentration today. And I meditated. I did meditate. All right, let's do it. If you use the word danger here, you could err very easily to think that the danger is the conditioning itself. But it is really talking about the intricacies involved in the reforms. All right. Yeah, so at line 1, it's like, just pay attention. If you pay attention and be diligent, you can correct the situation at line 1. It doesn't have to go so deep. That's, in a nutshell, right? Don't just go to the nutshell. Go through all this stuff, because it's very important. But yeah, that's what it's saying. It's saying that, if you pay attention to what's going on, if you tend to the circumstance, in a focused way, in a diligent way, you can go ahead and fix the situation at line 1. Okay, let me shut up. 9 in the second place, back to the text. Setting right what has been spoiled by the mother. One must not be too persevering. This refers to mistakes that as a result of weakness have brought about decay. Hence the symbol, what has been spoiled by the mother. Shekel. Here the mother, meaning the yin element, is associating with weakness. In the traditional Chinese family setting, the father is the stern one and the mother is the yielding one, and the two of them provide some kind of balance for the child. The harshness of the father is tempered by the mildness of the mother, and thus the child finds its equilibrium. Where the mother does not apply her gentleness intelligently, then there comes about decay. Let me say something about that. In an African society and in old Chinese society, the harshness of the father and the gentleness of the mother was more so a teamwork, where both mother and father were intelligently and skillfully in touch with each other so that the child would find its balance. It is teamwork, it is cooperation, and it helps children get a good sense of role identity. For example, in society, given the energy nature of the role that women must play, women ought not to psych themselves up too much. It harms their reproductive faculties. It harms their metaphysical receptive faculties. If a woman has to be too yang, it brings harm to her. And if she harms her reproductive and spiritual receptivity faculties, then society is harmed. The man cannot be mild and yielding. Men cannot cultivate the mild yielding faculty because he loses his drive, his ambition to create, to secure defend the environment, that space that society needs to dwell in. So in an African and an old Chinese society, to help young girls and to help young men identify the proper psychic states that correspond to them, the woman dealt with the children in a yin way, but in a skillful manner, which the children would not play the mother against the father. In the sense that the father would spank and the mother would console. Not in the sense that the father would say no and the mother would turn around and give to the child. That way, in African society, children do not grow up confused about the type of energy that is good for them. When women have to yang themselves up and spank children, that's when little girls grow up to be 44 hexagram sisters. We're going to talk about that. 44 hexagram sisters. That's that real Sekhmet way of, rolling. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh man, now let me not get into the battle I had with the Sekhmet sister on YouTube. That was a comical situation, but anyway. Become 44 hexagram sisters, right? Just real quick, 44 hexagram is all yang lines, and the yin line comes in from the bottom to kind of, exist within this group of men, right? So it's like a woman being yang, right? Or a woman being loose, even, right? All right, so so let's run it back to give it context. It says, when women have to yang themselves up to spank children, that's when little girls grow up to be 44 hexagram sisters. Because it carries over. Once you are going to deal a certain way with somebody, you deal with that way with everybody. Since it is not the law of the man, but the laws governing the tradition, then there was never any danger to the woman playing a yin role, because the man could not come and say, I am the man in this house and what I say goes. It wasn't that way. Let me run that back. Since it is not the law of the man, but the laws governing that tradition, then there was never any danger to the woman playing a yin role, because the man could not come and say, I am the man in this house and what I say goes. It wasn't that way. That man had to always act within the framework of laws and rules laid down and established by society. So it wasn't his word, but the rules of the laws of that society that governs this family tradition. It was the man's role to be the custodian of discipline within the household. That's what it means by setting right what has been spoiled by the mother, because the mother played the yin role. And if she overdid it, then the child will become spoiled because the mother was too weak. Of course, in today's society, we cannot take that line that way anymore. What has been spoiled by the one who is weak within the family? It could be an overindulgent father or an overindulgent grandparent. Somebody, whether father, mother, grandparent, who has been overindulgent with the child. The supervisor cannot put his subjects in order. To the text. In setting things right in such a case, a certain gentle consideration is called for in order to not wound. One should not attempt to proceed too drastically. Right? In order to not wound, one should not proceed too drastically. That's the basic sum up of this line, really. Right? We're going to read more, but that's the basic line. This is a line where the correction is not so harsh. Back to the text. In setting things right, in such a case, the certain gentle consideration is called for in order to not wound. One should not, okay, I said that. Here we have different things that we have to unravel. On one hand, the author is telling us that the decay has come about because someone has been too indulgent. Then he really changes speed and theme and central point, and says that we are talking about, that what we are talking about is a gentleness in setting right what has been spoiled. He shifted his whole subject and central theme. So there is a confusion here in the text. So this is, surgical criticalness. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to read these books with a critical thing, right, going on, because you miss stuff. You know what I mean? So that's why this work is a very, very, very good work. Thanks again, Shechem, for this work. But it also teaches you to be laser focused when you're reading stuff and when you're looking at things. Period. You know what I'm saying? It teaches you to be sharp. Because you have to break things down, right? You have to see the contradictions in things and understand how they apply. Back to Shechem. The first line says rigid adherence to tradition. That is the father. He's the one who is hold on and say that is the law, period. I think it says he is the one who says hold on and say this is the law, period. The woman is the one who, because she is yin, she will bend a little bit, right? Here we are told that we must not proceed too drastically, but drastically against whom? That's his question. But drastically against whom? The overindulgent person, because they are dealing more out of weakness of character. But one must still proceed energetically in righting what has been wrong in oneself. If you take this literally, it would mean that since the mother and father spoiled me out of their weakness so that I will not hurt their feelings, I will take my time to correct the situation. That is what a literal translation of this means. But that is very wrong. What it means here is that one ought not to proceed strongly against the overindulgent person because they are not skillful in handling their role. It was out of their weakness of character. But by the same token, the first line will get the same consideration. So the emphasis is really on the source of the decay. The first line, it is rigid adherence to tradition. The second line, weakness in applying discipline and overindulgence of the child, etc. Breaks it down, sums it up very clearly in that couple of sentences right there, that last sentence. 9 in the third place, setting right what has been spoiled by the father. There will be a little remorse, no great blame. This describes a man who proceeds a little too energetically in righting the mistakes of the past. Right? So last line it was a little bit, don't go so hard. This time it's, he went hard. He went hard, but it's saying it's no great blame because it's kind of like, you had to. We're gonna talk about that, or it works anyway. This describes a man who proceeds a little too energetically in righting the mistakes of the past. Now and then, as a result, minor discords and annoyances will surely develop. Back to Shechem. Proceeds too energetically against whom? If I am proceeding too energetically in righting mistakes within my person, that's not what is the issue here. Because I guess that ain't wrong. You can be hard with yourself. That cannot be what the oracle is speaking about. This is a person, this is person A proceeding to right the decay in person B and proceed with a little bit too much energy. That is what the oracle is speaking about. Therefore, minor discords and annoyances will develop. Otherwise, if it is me dealing with my problems, then I'm going to sit and argue with myself? No. There are two persons here, A and B. Person A writing the errors of person B. Back to the text. But too much energy is better than too little. Therefore, although he may at times have some slight cause for regret, back to Shechem. What is to be regretted is that there will be little discords, arguments here and there. ill feelings here and there. Back to the text. He remains free of serious blame. So he cut his sentence off again. He cut the sentence he was reading off again. I'm going to go back. But too much energy is better than too little. Therefore, although he may at times have slight cause for regret, he remains free of serious blame. Back to Shechem. Meaning, if he doesn't allow it to get out of hand, there is nothing wrong in what you have done. What is assumed here is that there was no malice, and as long as the person does not go overboard, the matter will straighten out. Okay. Yeah, okay. Keep going. 6 in the fourth place. Tolerating what has been spoiled by the father. In continuing, one sees humiliation. This shows the situation of someone too weak to take measures against the decay that has its roots in the past and is just beginning to manifest itself. It is allowed to run its course. If this continues, humiliation will result. So this is like in the first couple of lines, you have, addressing the correction of things. Here, this is someone too weak to handle the correction of things. So you let things be. Right? Back to Shechem. Here we find a person who does not know what to do. This is definitely the case of a broken record. The needle just stays there in the same groove and will not move from there. That person is too weak to take measures against decay that has its roots in the past, meaning that you were conditioned when you were a child, etc., but you are too weak to remove the decay. Means that you don't know how to do it. You have to come here. You have to come somewhere and have someone meditate with you or teach you spiritual culture or give you some remedies, some instructions. You need some outside intervention, right? So you see the relation between the first line and this fourth line, right? The hexagrams have a relation, with the lines have a relation with each other. So the first line at the beginning talks about things that can be corrected if a diligent effort is applied to it. So here, it's talking about going to someone to help you correct the problem. So, right? But there's a tendency to let the father stay as it is. That inbred into the line itself. This is Shechem speaking, right? After he says, you need some outside intervention. But there is a tendency to let the father stay as it is. That is inbred into that line itself. And the oracle promises that there will be humiliation if you allow the matter to remain in that way. All right, 6 in the 5th. Setting right what has been spoiled by the father, one meets with praise. So you see the second line was also, second line was about setting what's been right with the mother, right? So it has a relationship to the 5th line, and let's see how it goes. Setting right what has been spoiled by the father, one meets with praise. An individual is confronted with corruption originating from neglect in former times. He lacks the power to ward it off alone, but with able helpers, he can at least bring about a thorough reform. If he cannot create a new beginning, and that is and this too is also praiseworthy. All right. This is back to Shechem. This is much like the previous line. The subject of these two lines cannot do the work by themselves. They both need help. The difference is that the 4th line has the tendency to allow the decay to remain there, whereas at the 5th line, the person is very much bent on changing things. So whereas the 4th line tends to stagnate in the conditioning, the 5th line is very much aware and very willing and wanting to move out of that situation, right? So, you see, the second line is like, it's a correction that happens, but it's like, don't apply the correction too harshly or with too much force or too much energy. Here, it's like, going towards the correction with a level of energy, with a level of enthusiasm. It's like, now you want to, now you're like, no, bump that. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to get that job. I'm going to, you think of, place what you want to place in that slot. But this is someone going after the correction of the thing, right? I don't know what can be said about whether it's, whether what is too much or too less. But this person goes after the correction here, unlike at the fourth line, where where there's a neglect, right? 9 at the top. He does not serve kings and princes. He sets himself higher goals. Not every man has an obligation to mingle in the affairs of the world. There are some who are developed to such a degree that they are justified in letting the world go on its way and refusing to enter public life with a view to reforming it. But this does not imply a right to remain idle or sit back and merely criticize. Such withdrawal is justified only when we strive to realize in ourselves the higher aims of mankind. For although the sage remains distant from the turmoil of daily life, he creates incomparable human values for the future. Incomparable human values for the future. Right. So this is the top line, the sage, right? This is a wise individual who is kind of, going his own way, right? Let's see what Shechem says. He says, back to Shechem, this line from experience may be speaking about the sage or may not be speaking about the sage. May be speaking about somebody who is dealing with transcendental values, or they are simply speaking about somebody who ought not to simply sit as an outsider and criticize. So a couple applications there. That's why it's good to dig in on the shaping factors of readings, because then, these things are going to show you who we're talking about in the details of the text. All right, back to Shechem. The totality of this line is stating that there are some people who have gone beyond the values and formulas, the algebraic equations that society functions out of, because that person has seen the truth. They have been able to withdraw their consciousness back into zero and know that life is not about these pursuits, that you get entangled here. They know that Earth is a place of is simply a feedback plane that gives you a very good insight into how you are developing your true powers. But such a man who has attained to that level is able to see everything that is wrong in society. And because he has transcended it, doesn't give him the right to simply stand by and point out what is wrong in society. He must lend a hand. Right. Get that. This line applies to the person who is able to see what is wrong in a given setting. And the oracle is saying it is fine that you can see what is wrong, but you cannot just sit back and criticize. Pardon me. Excuse me. Pardon. Many pardons for my future, because I'm going to neglect it. I'm not always going to say that. Yo, this thing getting a little out of control. All right. This line, he must lend a hand, right? Right. This line applies to the person who is able to see what is wrong in a given setting. And the oracle is saying it is fine to see what is wrong, but you cannot just sit back and criticize. You have to roll your sleeves up and come and lend a hand. The subject has been identified, need not be a sage. The question could be your job. Comment on my perception that the department so-and-so is operating very inefficiently. That right there is deep. He just told you how to use the oracle. Commenting on my perception, how I'm seeing this. I got a judgment. But this takes somebody who's a thoughtful person. You have to be someone who is critical of self even, right? Thoughtful, in terms of how you put your mind on things. The person in his example says, oh man, they doing XYZ over there, and I don't like it. Well, most of us just simply go with that. We just simply say, yeah, that's what it is. Like, nah, man, and we deal with that emotion or whatever it be. You know what I mean? Pick up some of us pick up guns on that. You know what I mean? You know, this is wrong over here. You know. So this is saying, you know, this is how you deal with the oracle. The oracle, at the end of the day, the best use of the oracle is to grow your person. You know, it's about asking, you know, what am I doing? You know, every now and again, you should throw bones and say, you know, comment on my condition right now. What is the state of my condition, level of functioning in society or whatever? You know what I mean? You know, that gives you, you know, the ability to now see what someone else, God, right, is saying about you. You know what I mean? And if you're interested in the truth, then just do it. You know what I mean? You know, we can be scared of that one. Oh, I don't want to know. Well, see, you're not being honest. You're not being honest with yourself or nobody else, really. You know what I'm saying? Because you don't even, you saying no because you know what that oracle going to say. You know you. And so now you're scared of what that oracle got to say about you. You know what I'm saying? So this is good. This is, you know, I like this here. This is something that teaches you how to use this oracle, man. You know what I'm saying? Don't be just, you know, you got people who will ask about others all day long, but never turn the oracle to themselves and ask, you know, how am I looking? How am I seeing? Right? You know what I mean? What am I doing? Comment on what I just did. I just, you know, did XYZ. Let's comment on that. How'd you see that, God? You know what I mean? Can you deal with that level of humility about changing and affecting the person? You know what I'm saying? Deep stuff. All right. Messing up, stress line. Right, and then you go to the oracles on your perception and ask to comment on how Department X is functioning, and then compare that with what you have said about Department X. And you get the 18th hexagram, top line stress, which means, yes, you can see what is wrong because you have a higher perception, either generally or about that situation. But you'd better roll your sleeves up and give a hand. Don't just stand as an outsider criticizing. All right. All right, so it's an extra piece of instruction there in that scenario. Like you know, now do something about it. All right, learn how to tactfully help, because that is your spiritual challenge. That is what people don't understand. They come into a situation where they can see somebody functioning very incorrectly or with many shortcomings, that they can see it and the other person can't see it, and they just walk off criticizing, saying so and so and so and so. But they fail to see that it is now their spiritual demand or responsibility to help improve that situation. In some situations, that somebody is doing wrong, or your spiritual path at that time is to improve their performance in that situation. You know, because sometimes, you know, you see certain things that other people don't see. So now that you see it, it's your responsibility to help out, because ain't nobody else seeing it. It's your responsibility now, you know. So, but in your being able to see what they can't see, and if you know the solution, then your spiritual problems in that situation is knowing how to tactfully give a hand. The question is, can they solve their own problem? That is their question. What is your question? Can you help them solve their problem? You might know how to do it yourself, but you can help. But can you help them solve their problem? Do you know how to work with people to help them solve their problem? That is what the line is speaking about here. Question, third line, in dealing with one's own person. Answer. Okay, so he's gone through all the lines. Now he's dealing with questions. All right, let's go on a couple pages. Okay, third line in dealing with, okay, so let me say more about this line. Sometimes, right, and I've seen this, sometimes that third line, because, yeah, the oracle is going to speak, you know, sometimes just plain sentences. It's going to use sentences that are said through this oracle that you have to directly apply to your situation. Sometimes that top line is going to be speaking about somebody who just leaves the circumstance that everybody else is at. You know what I'm saying? Right? He does not serve kings and princes. He sets himself to higher goals. Sometimes this is somebody walking away from a job or walking away from a group or something like that, right? Sometimes that is what it is, like, without the rest of it. You know what I'm saying? And other times it's going to, be, these principles that are being said here. But, I can speak that one with experience right there. You know what I mean? No contradiction, you know what I'm saying? I won't be, sitting down and meditating at the 15, you know what I'm saying? To see how I'm different from the teachers and all of that stuff. I won't be doing that. But, yeah, sometimes. All right, here we go. Question. Third line in dealing with one's own person. Answer. If there were the case, you would most likely draw the 5th line in the 10th hexagram. See, that's kind of incomplete, right? It doesn't give you the full question, so he's answering and you don't have the full context of what he's answering. So that's not, my person don't like that. One proceeds with awareness of the dangers that attaches itself to such resoluteness, where you have to be resolved to do something and the elementals revolt. The 18th hexagram deals more with a two-party situation. See, we don't know what they're talking about. The hexagram, keep going, right? The hexagram, if it applies to to a person's character or applies to a job performance or something like that, it is speaking definitely about some conditioning. It is very explicit here that what we have is a crystallized situation where one has to go beyond the conditionings that one has crystallized around. There is no more growth taking place. One is reacting with reactive patterns that are not matching the demands itself. Question. Does the 18th hexagram relate to the 39th hexagram? See, that's a straight question. That's a good one right there. Does the 18th hexagram relate to the 39th hexagram? Answer. No, it doesn't. If you want to know if a hexagram has an organic relationship with another, you look up to your book of commentaries. He's talking about in the Wilhelm and Baines book, right? I Ching Book of Changes. And see if that hexagram is contained in the nuclear trigrams of that hexagram, or if it is a hexagram, or if the hexagram is the complementary of the other hexagram. So the nuclear, he's going to say it. The nuclear trigrams, if you take the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th lines of the hexagram as the bottom trigram, and take the 3rd, 4th, and 5th line as the top hexagram, as the top trigrams. So that's getting a little bit more complicated on how to read the lines, a little bit more intricate, a little bit more detailed, right? You want further understanding of hexagrams and how they apply to situations. You study the nuclear trigrams, which is the inside trigrams, right? And how they relate and make a hexagram to see what its function is to another hexagram, right? I hope y'all got that, right? So again, I'll read it again. He says, if you take line 2, line 3, and line 4, and you use that as the lower trigram, right? And then take line 4, line 5, line 3, line 4, and line 5. In other words, you're eliminating line 1 and line 6 to create the hexagram, right? And now you have a different hexagram that applies to that hexagram. And then he also used the example of dealing with the complementary hexagram to understand how a hexagram, or what a hexagram, what relationship a hexagram has with another hexagram. Complementary relationships of hexagrams, right? All right, y'all got that. It will enable you to see where many of the things said about a hexagram is derived from. It will not deal with the, right, so he's talking about, again, book 3 in the I Ching Book of Changes, there's book 1, 2, and 3. So book 2, I believe, is where most of the text that you go to the lines and look at your situation is. But there's a book 3 that deals with further intricacies, like the nuclear hexagrams. Right? It will not deal with the right. I will not deal with that right now, because in teaching the first class on something, you never enter into all the complexities, because you'll defeat your purpose. Pardon me. Always remember that whatever you attempt to teach something, always remember that whenever you attempt to teach something. Your first step is to render the understanding of something as simple as possible. And in simplifying something, just simply make it clearer. To simplify it means to make it clearer, meaning do not dilute it, because if you dilute it, then you destroy it. You do violence to the truths in it. When you simply been making it clearer, translating it into Western terms, experiences, and showing you how many things in that text come from tradition, and that only have meaning in the Chinese tradition setting or an African traditional setting, which must be then rephrased when you're applying it to a Western setting. Right? Okay. Once you finish with this class, we will go back to the very beginning again, and then begin to do more fine-tuning. Then we will be dealing with the nuclear trigrams and also the relationships between the lines. For example, the 4th line is the minister. The 5th line is the prince and the... I think he meant the 2nd line, the prince, right? The 5th line, the prince and the king. Okay. I jumped the gun. He said the 4th line is the minister. The 5th line, the prince and the king. The 3rd line is the point of transition. The 2nd line is the point of the official who carries out the mandates of the 5th line, the king. The 1st line is therefore the beginning of something, or at the beginning of something. And the 6th line is at the end of something, after the end of something. Right? So the different relationships of the lines. Right? But it requires that you have a firm understanding of the basic meaning of hexagrams. And you are seeing how the hexagram begins to work in certain situations in life before you jump into such complexities. Question on the complement. See, like state the whole question, because now it's 30, 40 years later and we're reading. You know what I mean? But we don't understand what we're reading now. Answer. The complement of the 18th hexagram is the 17th hexagram, which is following. The 17th hexagram explains how to identify a leader and the qualities that the follower must have in order to follow that leader, and how the leader ought to act with the follower, etc. The 18th hexagram requires for you to go to someone who knows something that is outside of that situation, and that can help you transcend that crystallized conditioning you have. Right? Okay. Okay, yeah. So now we are so basically we've done the lines, right? We did the lines, and the rest of this stuff is not as clear, right? Because we can't really get the goods of the questions, right? Question: in the judgment, does before and after the starting point indicate ritual? Okay, let's go in on that. He says no. Answer: no. Let's go back again and read it. Question: in the judgment, does before and after the starting point indicate ritual? Answer: no. The 3 days before and the 3 days after speak basically about the need to prepare seriously before you undertake the reform. The 3 days after means that after the matter is carried out, you have to monitor it. At this point, I haven't seen it in the actual working out, but you may want to look to see if there is some specific or direct Sebek complement to the hexagram, right? Because there's a similar instruction in the 57 hexagram at the 5th line, I believe, right? Where it says 3 days before and 3 days after, right? Question: Does the 3 days before and after refer to a lunar cycle? Answer: I started off this class saying that you're reading. Suppose this, saying that you're reading. Line. Suppose this is dealing with with something that has been ingrained within you, a bad habit that you have cultivated from childhood that is manifesting in your marriage. So you go to the oracle on what you have to do to make the marriage work, and you get this hexagram, and you find out that you have a habit of holding on to certain conditions. That condition is not going to be solved in one lunar cycle. Now this is all like half the letters are cut off. You are going to something, can't get it. I don't know. And it ends with condition. You might get this hexagram in answer to some chronic illness that you have. You are not going to solve it in one full moon situation. So it doesn't mean such as that as such. Because the whole preparation might take a year or two, and then the work itself might take another 2 or 3 years, and the monitoring might take another year or two. Right? Those truth burps, right? Okay. I just want to give you some additional insights into inquiring the oracles to eliminate difficulties in your understanding. In the past, you have been told to ask the oracles to comment on my perception that so-and-so is so-and-so. In dealing with such readings, I've found that sometimes it is very clear that the oracle is speaking about your perception, directly about your perception. Oftentimes, it is speaking about your perception indirectly and speaking about that situation. That requires a lot of skill in interpretation to be able to identify specifically about. And in some instances, it leads to some situations where there is a question where people say, I just don't see it that way. If you ask on the perception and you don't see it, then you end up in these loops. Let's say that a person X did X. Let's say that a person did X and you thought that they shouldn't have done X. Rather than ask to comment on my perception that this person should not have done X, simply ask the question. I simply ask to comment on this person's doing X. Right? Then match what your perception is against what the person has really done, according to what the oracle said, right? Because the oracle is giving its perception on what the person did. Simply take that reading and compare it with what your perception is. That is a very unambiguous insight into the situation. Ask about the person's conduct. Then compare that with what you think the person has done. The other person that becomes imperative into the other question that becomes imperative into that protocol that was given. The protocol is that you are advised to not walk up to your mate, to your friend, to somebody in the society and say what you did is wrong, unless it is something that is definitely known that should not be done. There are many questionable areas of life where you think it shouldn't have been done that way, whatever. When you deal with value judgments, you need to go to the oracles to find out or to find what you should have been or what should have been the correct way on how to deal with let me run this back. Oh my God. There are many questionable areas where you think it should be done that way. Whatever. When you deal with value judgments, you need to go to the oracle to find what should have been the correct way on how the person dealt with it, etc. As opposed to walking up to that person and saying you're wrong, period. Go to the oracles and let the oracles speak to that person's conduct. But I have found that has become necessary as a part of protocol, even more so than many other questions, is to go to the oracles and ask comment on your reaction to the situation. If somebody comes to you with an oracle reading, you are entitled to do a reading on their reaction to the situation. Oftentimes in life, the real problem is not the error that the other person has made, but your reaction to the other person's error in life. There are some of you who are constantly running to the oracles. Every little thing that somebody does or says, you're running to the oracles. So it is obvious that every little thing is upsetting you. It is not in itself no big deal if somebody errs here and there. There are some things that are mistakes, some things that are wrong and being improved or whatever. They are going to happen in a relationship. There are going to be disagreements. There are going to be misperceptions. There are going to be errors. Those things are going to happen. Oftentimes, the real problem in a relationship is the mistake that each person makes, but the reaction isn't. Right? The mistake that each person makes, but the reaction of the other person. The oracle might say, yes, there was an error, but it is this small. The error will correct itself. And your reaction, that is big. That is the point that you need to understand. Because you go to the oracles primarily to learn how to help yourself and the other person, not to verify and get verdict against somebody. Many of you are using the oracles as a verdict book, as the book of verdict, as the Asar Society book of hanging, 256 ways to hang you. No, he's joking. No, this getting upset, and then the oracle says, well, it was no big deal. It was all right. Then you hid the oracle reading. That's funny. You ask for somebody's conduct and the oracle says, it's all right, don't even worry about it. Now you put it down. That's funny. He said you hid the oracle reading. The oracle says, no, they weren't wrong. Then you hid the reading. Then you get to 21, third line stress. Then you are ready to go to counsel. So I ask, comment on this person's reaction to the situation. 58, top line stress. 55, top line stress. 36, top line stress. 1, top line stress. 2, top line stress. 62, top line stress. You understand what I'm talking about, right? That is another good way of studying hexagrams. Take all the top lines and read them through. Take all the fifth lines and read them through. The top lines correspond to the end of something, the issue, the outer parameter of an issue, or after the end of something, or going beyond the mark in something. Then all of the first lines, then all of the third lines. Lines 1, 3, and 6 work very closely together. Before you've committed yourself to something, the strength is still in the toes. Your mental strength is still in the toes, says the oracle. So think before you speak or act. Third line is transitions, transitional things. All right, y'all got to decipher all of that. All right. Question: what effect does the name of the trigram have on the hexagram itself? Answer: that is a very good question, but I'm not going to get into it tonight. But if you have a Wilhelm in the back, book 4 or book 5, where each hexagram is explained, where each trigram is explained, Twi, the joyful, Li, the light, brightness, beauty, clarity, go back and read into it. I have been doing that as I go along, give insight into the metaphor of each trigram and so forth. The only reason that I have done a breakdown on that is that I want you first to gain the insight into the meaning of the hexagrams, because many of you have the habit of being too schematic in your thinking. If I say Li means flame, every time you get the hexagram Li, Li in it, you would try to see it as flame hooks inside there. So I don't want to get involved in that. I just simply give it to you here. To give it to you where it applies. I'm doing a funny thing. I just simply give it to you where it applies, because the symbolism is intricate, and in the sense that there is a lot of corruption, a lot of looseness that has crept into the system itself. It is several thousand years old, and when something is that old, you have many poets and dilettantes and people who add their thing to the system. And then there are some people who are afraid to throw anything away that is traditional, no matter how bad it might be. They hold on to everything. So you get a book like this with good and bad in it. You'll find that there are two sets of symbolisms in here. One that uses the 5-element theory of Chinese philosophy and Taoist philosophy, and the other is just simply follows the poetic metaphors of traditional China. What I mean by that, wood, for example, sometimes it corresponds to the spring, the east, and on the other hexagram, it corresponds to the southwest, sun, such as the wood under the earth boring its way through. The symbolism is used very differently. But I don't want you to get involved too much in the schematic thinking, because schematic thinking is only useful once you have understood the system well, and you want to use the symbolism as a means of fine-tuning your understanding of the system and using it also as a mnemonic device, as an aid to memory. But first, let us gain good insight into what the hexagram is saying before allow your imagination to run away, or shall we say, allow symbols to run away with your imaginations. In lecture. All right, that was a good one. That was a good one. Breaking down the 18. Work on what's been spoiled. Yeah, man. So yeah, that's some good stuff. I'm gonna try to put some highlights, or not highlights, but bookmarks, or however the thing where you can go straight to it without all of the extra stuff, right? I'm gonna try to, break it down like that in the description there. All right, so yeah, man, that's it. All right, and I want to say, thank y'all, whoever, y'all, some of y'all folks been around since day one. Some of y'all are new folks. And I just want to say I appreciate all of y'all, coming through, checking me out from time to time. Again, I started this stuff so that people could have an understanding of this language, right? Or these languages, right? Because it's, imagine if the news could speak in terms of the I Ching, right? Or the Nefer, right? That's where I wanted to be someday. You know what I mean? I don't know if I'll ever really see it like that. You know what I mean? But I do know that when I first started, back when I wrote my I Ching book, I think it was 2014 or 2013, I remember studying, well, not studying, but researching I Ching on YouTube, and I did not see a lot of stuff. There was not a lot of stuff on I Ching back then. You know what I mean? And, you know, now there is a bunch of stuff on YouTube. Now there's a whole bunch of people who, you know, are saying stuff about I Ching. And, you know, I see that also as when you look at that reading that Carl Jung did regarding bringing this I Ching to the West. He spoke about, you know, kind of things being, you know, growing over time in terms of the interest, right? It's, you know, like at first people won't be able to get it because of the way that we're conditioned in our society, Western society. You know, is going to have a hard time with some of this stuff, so it's not going to be really taken seriously. But then later on, there'll be improvement. You know what I mean? So you see that, you know what I mean? Which is a good thing. So this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to help get this language out here so that more people can be conversant of it. You know what I mean? We can start referring to things as, you know, yeah, that's a 44 woman over there, or that's a 35 situation over there, or, you know, stuff like that. You know what I mean? It just gives better insight into what it is that we're talking about. You know what I'm saying? And, you know, and to deal with things from the level of ancient wisdom is best, because, you know, modern society screws things up. You know what I'm saying? Because information and knowledge gets diluted over time. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like a lot of people are deluded by thinking that because we got the internet, oh, we got AI, that we're in an advanced age. You know, we're advanced in certain things like technology, but even still, like I think that, you know, way back in the days, our ancestors was you know, we had machines and we had, you know, all kinds of technologies. You know, you go back to the days of Atlantis and how Atlantis drew into Kemet and things like that. We had all kinds of good stuff, you know, but the knowledge, right, of the spirit, right, spiritual things, spiritual teaching, spiritual understanding, that stuff has dimmed out, much so. You know, that stuff is not as thorough as it used to be. You know what I mean? So, you know, we have, you know, our priorities aren't in order in society. You know, we think it's all about information. No, it's really all about knowledge, right? True knowledge of self, true knowledge of what is inside, as above, so below, right? All right, I'm going to stop rambling, right? You know, sometimes the spirit is in the ramble, though. It is truly. But I'm going to stop rambling. And I'm going to do the next thing. So peace and love, y'all. And we're going to be back. You know how we do. Peace.